I still remembered the afternoon the invitation arrived because nothing about that day felt unusual until I opened my mailbox. The envelope rested on top of a stack of grocery store coupons and utility bills, thick cream-colored paper with my full name written in elegant black calligraphy. I froze before I even touched it. Nobody in my family ever mailed me handwritten anything. I looked around the quiet street as if someone might suddenly appear and explain why my heart had started racing over a piece of paper. The return address belonged to my brother. I carried it inside without opening it. For several minutes, it sat on my kitchen counter while I made coffee I didn't even want. The machine hummed in the background, filling the room with the rich smell of roasted beans, but my eyes never left the envelope. It had been nearly 3 years since my brother and I had spoken for longer than a forced holiday greeting. Birthdays became text messages. Christmas became awkward hugs followed by silence. Family cookouts became carefully choreographed performances where everyone pretended nothing had ever happened. Somehow, we had become strangers who shared childhood memories. I finally picked up the envelope. The paper felt expensive beneath my fingertips. My name had been written beautifully, every letter curved with care. For one impossible second, I allowed myself to believe maybe he had written it himself. I smiled at the thought before immediately correcting it. No. He wasn't the handwritten letter type. He probably paid someone. I carefully slid a letter opener beneath the flap. Inside rested a wedding invitation unlike anything I had ever seen. Dark emerald accents. Gold foil lettering. Heavy cardstock. Everything about it looked elegant. My eyes immediately searched for one thing. You are warmly invited. I read those words 3 times. Warmly invited. The phrase settled somewhere deep inside me. Not because of what it said. Because of what I wanted it to mean. I leaned against the kitchen counter and slowly exhaled. So, you're getting married. The apartment answered with silence. I looked toward the framed photograph sitting beside the living room window. It was the only picture I still kept of us together. We couldn't have been older than 10 and 12. Our grandmother had taken it during one summer barbecue. His arm rested around my shoulders. Both of us laughed at something outside the camera's view. Whenever I looked at that picture, I always wondered the same thing. When had we stopped looking at each other like that? When had becoming brothers stopped being enough? My phone buzzed before I finished reading the invitation. Mom. Of course. I answered. Hello? Her voice carried excitement I hadn't heard in years. You got it. I guess word travels fast. I've been waiting all morning. I smiled despite myself. I literally opened it 30 seconds ago. I know, she laughed. Your brother wanted to make sure everyone received theirs today. My fingers traced the raised gold lettering. So, this is really happening. It is. For a brief moment neither of us spoke. Then she said something that immediately changed the conversation. This could be the fresh start we've all needed. Fresh start. Families loved those words. Fresh start. New chapter. Move forward. Leave the past behind. Funny how those phrases always seem to come from people who hadn't carried the hurt. I don't know, Mom. You have to come. I didn't say I wasn't. I mean emotionally. I closed my eyes. I heard you. She lowered her voice. Baby, people grow. Did they? I wanted to believe that. I really did. She continued before I answered. Your brother has been under a lot of stress planning this wedding. Okay. He's older now. So am I. Exactly. Her optimism sounded almost rehearsed. As if she'd practiced this conversation before calling. I just don't want old misunderstandings ruining such a beautiful day. Misunderstandings. That word landed harder than she realized. There had been plenty of misunderstandings growing up. But there had also been moments that required no interpretation at all. I remembered standing in the school gym after winning an academic award. Dad had hugged my brother first because he'd scored the winning basket in his basketball game earlier that afternoon. Different event. Different achievement. Same outcome. I remembered birthdays where my gifts somehow became shared family presents while his remained exclusively his. I remembered speaking during dinner only to watch conversations continue as though I hadn't opened my mouth. None of those moments required clarification. Still, I swallowed those memories. I'll be there. Her relief practically came through the phone. I knew you would. I haven't RSVP'd yet. You will. I laughed quietly. You sound awfully confident. Because I know your heart. That sentence stayed with me after we hung up. I know your heart. Maybe she did. Maybe that had always been part of the problem. She knew I forgave too easily. Over the following weeks, the wedding slowly became part of my routine. The invitation remained propped against the fruit bowl on my kitchen counter. Every morning I saw it while pouring cereal. Every evening I noticed it while washing dishes. Sometimes I picked it up just to convince myself it was real. I ordered a new suit. Not because anyone expected me to. Because I wanted to feel good walking into that room. The tailor adjusted the sleeves while I stood before the mirror. Wedding? Yeah. You look proud. I smiled. I hope so. He nodded knowingly. Family weddings always mean something. If only he knew. A few days later, I found myself wandering through a department store searching for a gift. Every display seemed to ask impossible questions. What do you buy someone who spent years keeping you at arm's length? What price tag belonged on hope? I finally chose a handcrafted walnut serving board engraved with the couple's initials. Elegant. Simple. Thoughtful. The sales associate wrapped it carefully. Would you like a gift message? I hesitated. She waited patiently with her pen raised. Finally I said, just right. Wishing you both a lifetime of peace. She smiled. That's beautiful. I hoped it was true. Even if it never became true for us. As the wedding approached, family members suddenly remembered my phone number. An aunt called to ask whether I'd booked my hotel. A cousin texted asking if we could all take pictures together. Even relatives I hadn't heard from in months suddenly sounded cheerful. Everyone spoke with the same strange excitement. This is going to bring everybody back together. You'll see. It'll feel like old times. Old times. That phrase always made me uncomfortable. Which old times? The ones they remembered? Or the ones I lived through? One evening my cousin Denise invited me over for dinner. She studied me across the table while we ate fried chicken and collard greens. You nervous? A little. You thinking about backing out? I thought about it. And? I smiled. I'm tired of letting old pain make decisions for me. She nodded slowly. I like that answer. I want to believe people can change. They can. You sound unsure. She looked down at her plate before meeting my eyes again. They can change, if they actually want to. Neither of us said anything after that. The silence carried more honesty than another hour of conversation. The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I ironed my shirt twice. Polished shoes that already shined. Checked the invitation 3 separate times to confirm the venue address. Everything felt strangely important. As though one forgotten detail might somehow ruin an opportunity I'd waited years to receive. Morning sunlight spilled across my bedroom floor. I dressed carefully. Button by button. Tie. Jacket. Watch. I stood before the mirror longer than usual. You've got this. The man staring back looked confident enough. I wished he felt that way. Before leaving, I picked up the wrapped gift from the dining table. Then I glanced toward that old childhood photograph one last time. The smiling boys inside the frame still looked like brothers. I hoped, just for one day, the grown men could find their way back to them. I locked my apartment, carried the gift to my car, and started the engine. The highway stretched ahead beneath a bright blue sky. Music played softly through the speakers, but I barely heard it. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel while my thoughts wandered between hope and caution. With every mile, I imagined the conversations waiting for me. Maybe my brother would hug me. Maybe we'd laugh about how much time had passed. Maybe this wedding really would become the beginning of something new. By the time the venue finally came into view, I caught myself smiling. I took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, straightened my jacket, picked up the gift, and walked toward the entrance believing I was finally walking back into my family. I used to think favoritism had to be loud. I imagined it looked like parents openly announcing one child mattered more than the other. I believed it had to come with cruel words, obvious rejection, or dramatic moments that no one could deny. My family taught me otherwise. Favoritism wore a smile in our house. It hid behind excuses. It disguised itself as keeping the peace. By the time I was old enough to recognize it, everyone else had become so comfortable with the pattern that questioning it felt like breaking an unwritten family rule. I wasn't ignored every day. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, I was acknowledged just enough to keep hoping things would change. That hope followed me through my entire childhood. One of my earliest memories came from my 7th birthday. Mom filled the dining room with blue and silver balloons because blue had always been my favorite color. She baked my favorite chocolate cake from scratch, humming softly while frosting the sides with careful strokes. For one afternoon, I truly believed the day belonged to me. Family members slowly filled the house. My aunts laughed in the kitchen. My uncles argued over football in the living room. My cousins ran through the hallway until someone yelled at them to stop. I stood near the front door wearing a brand new shirt Grandma had bought me, waiting to open presents. Then my brother came downstairs. He couldn't have been more than 9 years old. He walked into the room holding a basketball trophy he had won that morning during a youth tournament. "I forgot to show everybody," he shouted. The room changed instantly. "Oh my goodness. Look at that. Come over here." Every adult gathered around him. Someone started clapping. Dad lifted the trophy over his head like it belonged to an NBA champion instead of a little boy. Mom smiled proudly. Pictures were taken. People cheered. The cake sat untouched on the dining room table. I stood beside it, still wearing the paper birthday hat Grandma had placed on my head. Nobody noticed I wasn't smiling anymore. Eventually Grandma walked over and squeezed my shoulder. "They'll get back to your birthday in a minute." I nodded. It was okay. But it wasn't. That minute became almost an hour. By the time everyone finally remembered the cake, the excitement had faded. The candles had already started bending from the heat inside the house. Mom relit them before everyone sang. The song sounded rushed. As if my birthday had become another item to check off before dinner. Later that night, while putting away wrapping paper, Dad smiled at me. "You understand, don't you?" I looked up. "What?" "Your brother only wins trophies every once in a while." I stared at him. "So birthdays happen every year." He chuckled like he'd made a clever joke. I laughed too. Not because it was funny. Because I had already begun learning that disappointing adults usually created bigger problems than disappointing myself. As the years passed, moments like that became normal. When report cards came home, I earned straight A's more often than not. I loved reading. History fascinated me. Science projects excited me. I spent hours building models and practicing presentations. One spring afternoon, I came home carrying a certificate from the regional academic competition. First place. I burst through the front door. "Mom?" She stepped into the hallway drying her hands with a dish towel. "How did it go?" "I won." Her face brightened. "Oh, baby." She hugged me tightly. For those few seconds, I felt seen. Then the front door opened again. My brother walked in after baseball practice. His uniform was covered in dirt. Coach had named him team captain. Mom released me almost immediately. Really? He grinned. Coach said the team voted. She wrapped both arms around him. I knew they would. She called Dad at work before I even had a chance to show either of them my certificate. That evening we ordered pizza to celebrate. Not my competition. His captaincy. Nobody ever said those words aloud. They didn't have to. I still placed my certificate on the refrigerator. 2 days later, grocery lists and coupons covered it. His team picture stayed on the refrigerator for nearly 3 years. Another memory found me every Thanksgiving. Our family packed around Grandma's long wooden dining table. The adults filled the room with loud conversations while the younger cousins chased each other through the house. I must have been 14. Politics came up during dinner. Everyone shared opinions. I quietly offered one of my own. I actually think, before I finished speaking, my uncle interrupted. What do you think, Marcus? Marcus. My brother. He repeated almost the exact point I had started making. Everyone nodded thoughtfully. Dad leaned back in his chair. That's a smart observation. I lowered my eyes to my plate. Nobody realized I had already said it. Or maybe they had. Maybe it simply hadn't mattered who spoke first. After dinner, Grandma found me washing dishes. You got quiet. I was just tired. She looked at me for a long moment. You don't have to pretend around me. I kept scrubbing the same plate. I wish people listened. She sighed softly. I know. Those 2 words almost broke me. Not because they solved anything. Because someone had finally admitted what everyone else ignored. Grandma never challenged my parents directly. That wasn't her way. Instead, she loved me loudly whenever she could. She came to every school play. She framed every report card. She asked questions nobody else remembered to ask. What book are you reading? What are you working on now? What makes you excited these days? Simple questions. Questions that made me feel like I existed. After she passed away, the house somehow became quieter. Not because people stopped talking. Because the only person who consistently heard me was gone. Dad often described himself as a peacemaker. He hated arguments. If voices became loud, he'd immediately shut conversations down. At first, I admired that. As I got older, I realized keeping peace wasn't the same as creating fairness. One Saturday afternoon, my brother borrowed my bike without asking. He wrecked it trying to jump a curb. The front wheel bent beyond repair. When I confronted him, he shrugged. It was an accident. I told you not to ride it. So? Dad walked into the garage halfway through our argument. What's going on? He broke my bike. Dad looked at the twisted wheel. Then he looked at both of us. It was an accident. I know, but let it go. He never even apologized. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. You're the younger brother. I blinked. So? Be the bigger person. There it was again. The family motto. Be the bigger person. Somehow that responsibility always belonged to me. Never him. Mom repeated those same words so often they became background noise. He's under pressure. Don't take it personally. You know how your brother is. You're stronger than this. At first I believed her. Eventually I started wondering why my strength always required accepting someone else's behavior. Why did maturity only flow in one direction? By high school, I had become the dependable one. If Grandma needed groceries, I went. If Dad's car needed washing, I helped. If Mom worked late, I cooked dinner. Nobody asked. I simply did it. People praised me constantly. You're so responsible. We can always count on you. You're such a good son. The compliment sounded nice until I realized something. Reliable people often became invisible. Nobody celebrated what they expected. Meanwhile, every ordinary thing my brother accomplished became extraordinary. When he remembered to call Mom, everyone praised him. When he arrived on time, relatives acted surprised. When he apologized for something small, people admired his growth. I wondered what it would feel like to receive that kind of grace. College finally gave me distance. Living away from home allowed me to discover who I was without constantly standing in someone else's shadow. Friends noticed things my family overlooked. They asked for my opinions. They celebrated my accomplishments. They remembered details from conversations we'd had weeks earlier. Sometimes those simple acts felt almost uncomfortable. I wasn't used to occupying space without apologizing for it. Whenever I returned home during holidays, the old patterns greeted me before anyone said hello. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody insulted me. Nobody shouted. The roles simply slipped back into place. My brother naturally became the center of every room. I naturally adjusted around him. It became muscle memory. Even as adults. Even after careers, apartments, and separate lives. The script never changed. Still, I kept showing up. Christmas. Birthdays. Cookouts. Anniversaries. I told myself families were complicated. Nobody was perfect. Love looked different for everyone. Deep inside, another voice whispered something I refused to accept. Maybe they loved me. Maybe they just never learned how to value me. When my brother's wedding invitation arrived years later, all those memories quietly stirred beneath the surface. I tried to bury them beneath hope. I convinced myself adulthood had changed us all. I believed time had softened old habits. As I drove toward the venue with a carefully wrapped gift resting on the passenger seat, I had no idea that my childhood wasn't waiting behind me anymore. It was waiting for me inside that building, dressed in new clothes, smiling politely, and preparing to remind me exactly where my family believed I belonged. The morning of the wedding arrived with the kind of quiet that usually came after a storm, not before one. Sunlight slipped through my bedroom curtains in soft golden lines, stretching across the hardwood floor until it reached my polished shoes. They sat exactly where I had left them the night before, shining brighter than they ever needed to. For a long moment, I remained on the edge of my bed. My suit hung from the closet door. The wrapped wedding gift rested beside it. Everything looked ready. I wasn't sure I was. My phone buzzed before I could talk myself into overthinking another hour. Denise. Her name alone made me smile. Good morning, I answered. You awake? Barely. She laughed. You sound nervous. I've been nervous for 3 weeks. You still planning to go? I looked toward the invitation sitting on my dresser. Yeah. You sure? No. She stayed quiet. That was one thing I loved about Denise. She never rushed to fill silence. I keep thinking maybe this is different, I finally admitted. It could be. I know. But if it isn't? I rubbed my forehead. If it isn't, at least you'll know. Her words lingered in the room. At least you'll know. No more guessing. No more wondering whether I imagine things. No more questioning memories that everyone else seemed determined to rewrite. I'll call you later. You better. And if I don't? I'll call you first. I laughed. Deal. After hanging up, I finally stood. The shower washed away some of the tension clinging to my shoulders. I shaved carefully. Buttoned my crisp white shirt. Adjusted my emerald tie to match the wedding colors printed on the invitation. When I slipped into my charcoal suit jacket, I barely recognized the man staring back from the mirror. He looked confident. Successful. Composed. Nothing about him suggested he still carried childhood disappointments in invisible pockets. I picked up the framed photograph from my dresser. The same picture I'd looked at countless times over the years. 2 little boys. Grass stains on their jeans. Wide smiles. My brother's arm wrapped around my shoulders. Grandma had captured us in the middle of laughing. Not posing. Just laughing. Sometimes I wondered what we had found so funny. I traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. I hope you're still in there somewhere. The apartment answered with silence. Before leaving, I grabbed the wrapped serving board from the dining table. The silver ribbon caught the morning sunlight. Simple. Elegant. A gift chosen with more hope than obligation. Outside, the air felt warm without being heavy. The sky stretched clear and bright above the neighborhood. It looked like the kind of day families remembered forever. I placed the gift carefully in the passenger seat before starting the engine. As the navigation directed me toward the venue, soft jazz filled the car. The music reminded me of Saturday mornings growing up. Dad always played old records while cleaning the garage. Those mornings had been some of the few times my brother and I actually worked together instead of competing. I smiled despite myself. One memory surfaced clearly. I couldn't have been older than 11. Dad had asked us to wash his truck. My brother sprayed me with the water hose before we'd even started. I chased him across the driveway until both of us slipped in the wet grass. We laughed so hard our stomachs hurt. Dad came outside pretending to be angry. What happened to my truck? Neither of us answered. We just kept laughing. Dad eventually laughed too. One afternoon. Nobody compared us. Nobody picked favorites. We were simply brothers. The memory faded as traffic slowed near a red light. I sighed. Why did those moments always feel so small compared to everything else? Another vibration interrupted my thoughts. A text message. Mom. Drive safely. Can't wait to see you. Love you. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Maybe she really meant it. Maybe today truly would be different. I replied. Almost there. Love you too. The closer I drove, the more expensive the neighborhood became. Large stone homes gave way to vineyards and carefully landscaped entrances. Luxury cars filled nearby parking lots. Eventually I spotted elegant white signs directing guests toward the ceremony. Gold lettering. Fresh flowers. Everything looked flawless. A valet greeted me with a smile. Good afternoon, sir. I handed him my keys. Enjoy the celebration. I hope to. He nodded politely, unaware of how honest my answer had been. The venue took my breath away. White marble walkways curved through perfectly maintained gardens. Rose bushes bloomed beside quiet fountains. Soft instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers tucked among the trees. Guests wandered between outdoor seating areas holding glasses of champagne and laughing beneath enormous oak trees decorated with hanging lanterns. For a brief moment, I simply stood there. The entire place looked like hope. An older woman wearing a floral dress smiled as she passed. Beautiful day, isn't it? It really is. I meant it. A cousin spotted me before I reached the entrance. There he is. Marcus's college roommate, Darren, wrapped me in a quick hug. Man, look at you. You clean up pretty well yourself. He laughed. It's been too long. It has. Several relatives turned toward us. One by one they approached. Aunt Sheila kissed my cheek. My goodness. You look handsome. Thank you. Uncle Reggie shook my hand firmly. Proud of you. It means a lot. Even cousins I hadn't spoken to in months welcomed me warmly. Nobody acted awkward. Nobody ignored me. It felt normal. Almost suspiciously normal. Mom appeared near the entrance before I even spotted her. Her face lit up. There you are. She hugged me tightly. Longer than usual. When she stepped back, her eyes became watery. "You look so grown." I smiled. "I've been grown for a while." "I know." She laughed softly before smoothing imaginary wrinkles from my jacket. "You look wonderful." "So do you." Her emerald dress matched the wedding colors perfectly. She looked genuinely happy. For the first time all morning, some of the tension left my body. Maybe I had worried for nothing. Dad joined us moments later. He adjusted his tie before pulling me into one of his brief, familiar hugs. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." He nodded once. No long speech. No awkwardness. Just quiet approval. Oddly enough, that felt significant coming from him. "Your brother's getting pictures taken," Mom said. "You'll see him after the ceremony." "Okay." She reached for my arm. "I've been praying about today." I looked at her. "I know. No matter what happened before." She squeezed my hand gently. "Today starts something better." I wanted to believe every word she said. "I hope you're right." "So do I." The ceremony itself passed beautifully. I watched from my seat as guests smiled through tears. Music floated gently across the garden. My brother looked happier than I'd seen him in years. When he exchanged vows, his voice cracked with emotion. Watching him smile like that reminded me of the little boy from Grandma's photograph. The one who used to race bicycles down our street. The one who once stayed awake all night helping me build a science fair volcano after mine collapsed. Those memories returned so unexpectedly that they caught me off guard. Maybe people really could grow. Maybe families could heal. After the ceremony, everyone applauded as the newly married couple walked back down the aisle. Guests slowly made their way toward the reception hall. Laughter echoed through the gardens. Servers carried trays filled with sparkling drinks and elegant appetizers. A violin quartet played softly beneath a covered terrace. Everything flowed effortlessly. I picked up my gift from the reception table where attendants had carefully arranged dozens of beautifully wrapped boxes. The ballroom doors stood open ahead of us. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Tall floral arrangements lined the entrance. Every table shimmered beneath candlelight and polished glass. It looked magnificent. I smiled without forcing it. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel around my family. Belonging. I reached into my jacket pocket and removed my seating card. Table 8. I scanned the elegant seating display near the entrance, following rows of neatly arranged name cards. Table 3. Table 5. Table 7. Finally. Table 8. I found my name. A strange crease formed between my eyebrows. I looked at the card again. Then toward the ballroom. Then back at the card. The smiling hostess noticed my hesitation. She stepped closer with the same warm expression she'd given every guest. "Can I help you find your seat?" I handed her the card, suddenly unsure whether I had misunderstood what I was reading. She glanced at it, then looked back at me with an expression that changed almost too quickly to notice. "Oh." She hesitated. Then she quietly motioned for me to follow her. Without another word, she led me away from the beautifully decorated ballroom and toward a set of glass doors at the far end of the hallway. I followed the hostess without asking questions. At first, I assumed she was leading me through a side entrance to another section of the ballroom. Large weddings sometimes had overflow seating. Maybe table 8 sat in a smaller room connected to the main reception. Maybe the card had been printed differently. Maybe. The word echoed inside my head with every step. Maybe. She walked several feet ahead of me, her heels clicking softly against the polished stone floor. She smiled politely at every guest we passed, but something about her posture had changed. The confidence she'd shown while greeting arrivals had disappeared. Her shoulders seemed tense. She avoided looking directly at me. That tiny detail unsettled me more than anything else. People avoided eye contact when they carried uncomfortable news. We reached a pair of tall glass doors. Music from the ballroom became muffled as she pushed one open. Warm afternoon air drifted inside. She stepped aside and motioned toward a small patio. "Your table is right over there." For a second, I simply stared. "I think there's been a mistake." She looked down at the seating card in her hand. "I'm sorry, sir." She pointed toward a single round table tucked against the far railing. "Table 8. I followed her finger. The patio overlooked a beautiful lake. White flowers decorated the railing. If I had visited the venue on any other day, I might have admired the view. Instead, my attention locked onto one thing. There was only one occupied table outside. Mine. It wasn't completely alone. A long catering station stood nearby. Stacks of serving trays rested beneath silver covers. Waiters hurried back and forth carrying drinks through swinging service doors. Every few seconds another employee rolled carts filled with dishes across the patio. My table sat directly beside them. I forced a small smile. "I'm supposed to sit here?" She nodded apologetically. "Yes, sir." I looked back toward the ballroom through the enormous glass wall. From outside, I could see nearly every guest. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. People laughed around beautifully decorated tables. The bride and groom's table stood directly in the center. My parents sat only a few feet away. So did my aunts, uncles, cousins. Every immediate family member occupied tables near the dance floor. Everyone except me. I turned back toward the hostess. "Are you sure?" She checked the card again. Then another clipboard. Finally she whispered, "I'm very sorry." Something inside me refused to accept what my eyes clearly saw. "There has to be another Marcus." She offered a sad smile. "Your full name matches our seating chart." Silence settled between us. The kind that stretched just long enough to become unbearable. She finally excused herself. "If you need anything, please let one of us know." Then she walked away, leaving me standing beside a table that suddenly felt much smaller than it actually was. I remained there for several seconds without moving. Guests continued entering the ballroom. Nobody looked outside. Nobody noticed me. I slowly walked toward the table. A white place card rested neatly beside polished silverware. My name appeared in elegant calligraphy. There was no mistake. Someone had carefully written it. Someone had deliberately placed it here. Someone had approved it. I set my gift on the empty chair beside me. My fingers felt strangely numb. A waiter rushed past carrying champagne glasses. He smiled politely. "Beautiful day." "It is." The words left my mouth automatically. He disappeared before I finished speaking. Inside, applause erupted. The newlyweds had entered the reception. Everyone stood. Guests lifted their glasses. Music swelled through hidden speakers. I couldn't hear their words clearly through the thick glass, but I watched dozens of smiling faces turn toward my brother. Toward family. Toward celebration. I instinctively stepped closer to the window. The glass reflected my own face. For a strange moment, I looked like someone trying to enter a place where he didn't belong. I took another step back. No. I belonged. Didn't I? A woman passing through the patio slowed slightly. She looked at me. Then at my table. Then toward the ballroom. Confusion crossed her face before she quickly continued walking. She wasn't the last. Over the next several minutes, more guests noticed. Every reaction looked almost identical. A quick glance. A pause. A flicker of uncertainty. Then polite silence. Nobody asked questions. Nobody wanted to become involved. One elderly couple stopped near the railing. The husband leaned toward his wife, speaking quietly enough that he probably believed I couldn't hear him. I thought he was the groom's brother. So did I. Then why is he sitting out here? She gently touched his arm. Don't stare. They walked away. Heat climbed into my face. I looked down at my watch just to avoid meeting anyone else's eyes. The second hand moved steadily. Time didn't slow down simply because someone's heart had. I pulled out my chair but couldn't make myself sit. Instead, I walked a few steps farther down the patio. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Birds skimmed across the water. Everything looked peaceful. Beautiful. Normal. Inside me, nothing felt normal. I replayed the last hour over and over. Mom hugging me. Dad saying he was glad I'd come. Relatives complimenting my suit. Everyone acting warm. Had they known? The thought arrived quietly. Then refused to leave. If they knew. Why hadn't anyone said something? Maybe they hadn't seen the seating chart. Maybe this really had been a mistake. Yes. That had to be it. Weddings were complicated. Planners made errors, cards got misplaced. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over Mom's name. Then I stopped. What exactly was I supposed to text? Hey Mom, why am I eating dinner beside the catering carts? I laughed once. A short, humorless sound. It disappeared almost immediately. The service doors burst open again. 2 employees wheeled large dessert carts onto the patio. One nearly bumped into my chair. Oh, excuse us. No problem. Will only be a minute. They positioned the carts only a few feet away. One of them frowned. I didn't realize someone was sitting here. The other employee shrugged. This is where they told us to stage everything. My stomach tightened. Stage everything. I looked around. Ice buckets. Extra chairs. Unused floral arrangements. Cases of bottled water. This wasn't just an outdoor dining area. It was the venue's workspace. The place guests weren't really supposed to notice. A young server approached carrying a basket of bread. She looked confused. Table 8? Yeah. She placed the basket down carefully. I'm sorry. For what? Her eyes widened. Nothing. She hurried away before I could ask another question. Another apology. Another strange look. Another person who seemed uncomfortable simply standing near me. Inside, the music changed. The first dance began. I watched silhouettes move across the polished ballroom floor. The bride rested her head against my brother's shoulder. Guests smiled. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Even through the glass, I could feel the warmth inside that room. Laughter. Family. Love. Everything existed only a few yards away. Yet it felt impossibly distant. A little girl wandered onto the patio chasing bubbles floating through the air. She couldn't have been older than 5. She looked at me curiously. Why are you outside? Her mother hurried after her. Honey. The woman froze after noticing where I sat. Embarrassment washed across her face. I'm so sorry. She grabbed her daughter's hand. The little girl looked back at me. But everybody else is inside. Her mother pulled her away before I answered. Children had a way of asking questions adults spent years avoiding. I finally lowered myself into the chair. The cushion felt cold. I rested my hands on the table and stared at the elegant centerpiece placed directly in front of me. Fresh white roses. Perfectly arranged. Beautiful enough to fool anyone into believing this seat had been prepared with care. But flowers couldn't disguise isolation. Across the glass, I spotted my parents. Mom laughed at something Aunt Sheila said. Dad raised his glass during another toast. Neither one looked toward the patio. Not once. I searched the room for my brother. He stood beside his new wife greeting guests. Smiling. Shaking hands. Accepting hugs. He looked happier than I'd ever seen him. Then, as if sensing something, he glanced toward the glass wall. Our eyes met. Only for a second. Just long enough for him to recognize exactly where I was sitting. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look confused. He simply held my gaze for one silent heartbeat, then turned away and continued greeting the next guest. The room on the other side continued moving as if nothing unusual had happened. People laughed. Champagne glasses clinked together. The band eased into another smooth jazz number. Servers floated between tables carrying silver trays filled with appetizers. Everything inside looked effortless. Everything outside felt painfully deliberate. I looked down at the place card one more time. My name hadn't been scribbled onto it at the last minute. The lettering matched every other card in the room. The paper matched. The ink matched. The ribbon tied around the napkin matched. Someone had planned this. That thought refused to leave me. I slowly stood from the chair. The patio suddenly felt too small. Every time another server rushed past, I had to step aside to avoid blocking their path. I wasn't a guest. I was an obstacle. I took one deep breath and walked back toward the ballroom. If there had been a mistake, someone needed the chance to fix it. If there hadn't, then I deserved at least one honest answer. The hostess noticed me approaching. Her expression tightened almost immediately. "Is everything okay, sir? I just need to speak with someone." She nodded politely. "Of course. I'd like to find my mother. I believe she's greeting guests near the family table." I thanked her and stepped inside. The warmth of the ballroom wrapped around me instantly. The music sounded louder indoors. Conversations overlapped in every direction. The scent of fresh flowers mixed with expensive perfume and catered food. It should have felt welcoming. Instead, I felt like I'd crossed into a room where everyone else already knew a secret. Mom stood exactly where the hostess had said. She laughed with two of my aunts while holding a champagne flute. The moment she noticed me walking toward her, her smile faded just enough for me to catch it. "There you are," she said. "I've been looking for you. I needed to ask you something." She glanced toward my aunts. "Excuse us." We stepped a few feet away from the crowd. She reached for my arm. "Are you enjoying yourself?" I looked at her quietly. "My table is outside." She blinked. "I know." The answer came too quickly. Not surprise. Recognition. My heart sank another inch. "You knew?" She hesitated. "Baby. You knew." She looked down at the floor before meeting my eyes again. "It's just seating. Just seating." The words echoed inside my head. I almost laughed. "Mom. I don't want to do this today. I'm sitting beside catering carts." She gently squeezed my arm. "I know it isn't ideal." "Not ideal?" People brushed past us carrying drinks and smiling for photographs. Nobody noticed how hard I struggled to keep my voice steady. "I'm the groom's brother." "I know. Everyone else is inside." She looked over her shoulder before lowering her voice. "Please." "Please what?" "Not here." I searched her face for something. Anything. Confusion. Anger. Embarrassment. Instead, I found exhaustion. The kind that came from avoiding a conversation for too long. "I just want to understand." She closed her eyes briefly. "We'll talk after the wedding." "No. Please. No." My voice stayed calm. Almost frighteningly calm. "I've waited years for after." She didn't answer. She simply looked toward the dance floor again. The conversation was over. Not because we'd finished. Because she'd decided it was. I have guests waiting, she whispered. Then she walked away. I remained exactly where I stood. Aunt Sheila approached only moments later. She smiled too brightly. There you are. I forced a polite smile. Hi. You look handsome. Thank you. She tilted her head. Everything okay? My table's outside. Oh. She laughed awkwardly. I'm sure they had to move things around. Why? You know how weddings are. No. She shifted her purse higher on her shoulder. These planners make all kinds of mistakes. So it was the planner? I didn't say that. You just implied it. She looked toward the buffet. I should go say hello to your grandmother's cousin. She passed away 6 years ago. Aunt Sheila froze. For one uncomfortable second neither of us spoke. Then she quietly muttered, right. Without another word, she walked away. I watched her disappear into the crowd. Another conversation. Another escape. No answers. Only exits. I wandered toward the bar. Not because I wanted a drink. Because I needed somewhere to stand without looking completely lost. The bartender smiled. What can I get you? Water. He handed me a cold glass. You doing all right? I smiled automatically. I'm fine. The lie tasted almost as bitter as the ice water. Across the room, Uncle Reggie spotted me. He walked over carrying a plate piled with food. There you are. I've been looking for someone. You found me. I nodded. I wanted to ask you something. He looked mildly uncomfortable before I'd even spoken. Sure. Did you know where I was sitting? He stared at his plate. I didn't make the seating chart. I didn't ask who made it. Silence. I asked whether you knew. He slowly nodded. I saw it yesterday. Yesterday. You saw it yesterday. I figured there was a reason. What reason? I don't know. Did you ask? He shifted his weight. It wasn't really my place. I couldn't stop myself. It wasn't your place? He sighed. You know how family can be. Actually. I looked around the room. I thought I did. He opened his mouth as if to respond. Instead, he simply patted my shoulder. I'm sorry. Then he walked away. Those 2 words had become strangely common. I'm sorry. Nobody apologized for what happened. Only for how uncomfortable it made them feel. I spotted Dad standing near one of the windows speaking with several business associates. He noticed me immediately. His smile faded. He excused himself and stepped toward me. Everything all right? I'd like to know why I'm outside. His jaw tightened. We're doing this now. When were you planning to? He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Today isn't the day. You've said that my whole life. His eyes met mine. For a second, I thought he might finally say something honest. Instead. Let's not create a scene. The sentence landed harder than I expected. A scene? Several nearby guests turned briefly before returning to their conversations. I lowered my voice even further. I'm whispering. I know. So who's creating a scene? He didn't answer. You always know the right thing to say, I continued quietly. But somehow you never say it. His shoulders dropped. You don't understand everything. Then help me understand. I can't. Or you won't? He looked away. I have responsibilities today. So do I. What responsibilities? I've spent 30 years pretending this family doesn't hurt me. The words escaped before I could stop them. Dad looked genuinely wounded. Not because I'd accused him. Because someone else might hear. He stepped closer. Please. Don't. I love you. I know. But love without honesty starts looking a lot like convenience. Neither of us spoke. Finally he said the same sentence Mom had used. We'll talk later. I smiled sadly. No. You don't mean that. I think I finally do. I walked away before he could answer. Halfway across the ballroom, someone called my name. I turned. My brother approached with his new wife beside him. She smiled warmly. She looked genuinely happy to see me. He didn't. He looked rushed. Distracted. As though checking another task off a long wedding checklist. There you are, he said. I've been looking for you. I almost asked where. Outside? Beside the catering carts? Instead I simply nodded. Congratulations. Thanks. He glanced towards several waiting guests. I heard there was some confusion about your seat. Confusion. Interesting choice of words. I don't think confusion is the problem. He forced a quick smile. The venue had limited space. I looked at him carefully. The venue? Yeah. So they decided the groom's brother belonged outside? His wife looked from him to me. The smile slowly disappeared from her face. He shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't personal. Really? No. Then who made the decision? He looked past me toward another group of guests waving for his attention. I don't have time for this right now. I nodded once. I figured. He reached out and briefly touched my shoulder. A gesture so practiced it felt empty. I'm sorry if your feelings got hurt. If. One tiny word. Enough to erase responsibility. Enough to make my pain sound optional. I looked into his eyes searching for regret. I found impatience instead. He offered one final tight smile before turning toward the waiting guests. As he walked away, I noticed his new wife remained exactly where she was. She watched him disappear into the crowd. Then she slowly turned back toward me. Her expression held something every member of. She frowned slightly before speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. They told me you weren't coming. For a second, I honestly wondered if I had heard her correctly. The music faded into the background. The conversations around us blurred into meaningless noise. I looked at her, searching her face for even the slightest hint that she was joking. She wasn't. What? She glanced over her shoulder to make sure my brother had disappeared into the crowd. When she looked back at me, her expression carried genuine confusion. I thought. She stopped herself and swallowed. I thought you decided not to come. I RSVP'd 6 weeks ago. You did? Personally. She blinked twice. I didn't know that. Neither of us spoke. She looked almost as unsettled as I felt. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have said anything. No. My voice came out softer than I expected. I'm glad you did. She shifted uneasily, twisting the small bouquet she still carried from the ceremony. I don't know everything. I don't need everything. I just. She hesitated again. I hate feeling like I stepped into the middle of something I don't understand. For the first time that day, I believed someone was actually telling me the truth. Not because she had answers. Because she admitted she didn't. That kind of honesty felt strangely rare inside my family. What exactly were you told? I asked. She looked down. That your relationship with the family had been complicated. I almost smiled. Complicated. Another favorite family word. They said you probably wouldn't be comfortable coming. I drove 3 hours. I know. They mailed me an invitation. I know. They accepted my RSVP. I know. Each answer seemed to make her more uncomfortable. I don't understand it either. Someone called her name from across the ballroom. She looked over instinctively. I have to go. Before she left, she touched my arm gently. I'm really sorry. There it was again. Another apology. Except this one felt different. It wasn't offered to end the conversation. It came from someone who genuinely wished things had happened another way. She hurried back toward the bridal party, leaving me standing near the edge of the dance floor. I watched guests laugh around my brother. Nobody else seemed aware that my entire understanding of the day had just shifted. They told her I wasn't coming. Which meant someone had expected my seat to remain empty. The realization settled over me slowly. Like cold rain. I walked back toward the patio. Nobody stopped me. Nobody asked where I was going. Through the glass doors, the evening sun had begun sinking lower across the lake. Long shadows stretched across the stone floor. My lonely table waited exactly where I'd left it. The untouched bread basket remained beside my plate. I pulled out my chair but didn't sit. Instead, I rested both hands on the back of it and stared through the ballroom windows again. From here, everyone looked like actors performing inside a silent movie. Smiling. Laughing. Celebrating. Completely unaware that one person stood only a few yards away trying to understand why he'd become invisible. You haven't eaten. The voice came quietly behind me. I turned. One of the bridesmaids stood near the doorway. She looked familiar. Tall. Dark green dress matching the wedding colors. Her hair gathered into an elegant low bun. I remembered seeing her during the ceremony standing beside the bride. She carried a small dessert plate in one hand. I brought you some food. You didn't have to. I know. She walked over and gently placed the plate on my table. Roasted chicken. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. A dinner prepared with the same care everyone else inside had received. Except hers arrived carried by hand. Not served. I'm Olivia. I introduced myself. I know. A faint smile crossed her face. I've heard your name a lot today. Something in the way she said it caught my attention. A lot? She nodded once. More than anyone probably realizes. I looked at her carefully. She seemed nervous. Not scared. Just uncertain. Like someone deciding whether to carry a burden a little longer or finally set it down. She glanced through the glass toward the ballroom. Then back at me. Can I ask you something? Sure. Were you originally supposed to sit with your family? The question hit me harder than I expected. I thought I was. She closed her eyes briefly. So it really happened. What happened? She inhaled slowly. I wasn't sure if I should tell you. Tell me what? She looked around the patio. No one stood nearby. Only servers moved between the kitchen and reception hall. When she spoke again, her voice barely rose above a whisper. I helped the wedding planner organize place cards Thursday night. Every muscle in my body tightened. There were last-minute changes. I didn't interrupt. I remember your name because the planner asked me to move your card. Move it? She nodded. Originally you were seated at the family table. For several seconds I simply stared at her. Family table. Exactly where I had assumed I'd be. That I saw it myself. Her words came carefully. You were beside your parents. My heartbeat slowed instead of quickening. Sometimes shock felt strangely calm. What changed? She looked back toward the ballroom again. The groom. My throat tightened. My brother? She nodded. He came in during setup. I couldn't breathe. He asked for the seating chart. What did he say? Olivia hesitated. I've been thinking about whether I should repeat it. I need you to. She looked directly into my eyes. I think you deserve the truth. Nobody had spoken those words to me in years. The truth. Not comfort. Not excuses. Just truth. She folded her hands together. The planner asked if there was a mistake. And? Your brother said there wasn't. I waited. He pointed to your name. My fingers gripped the chair harder. He asked that your seat be moved. Why? The planner reminded him immediate family usually stayed together. I swallowed. What did he say? Olivia looked genuinely uncomfortable now. He smiled. That answer somehow hurt more than shouting would have. He smiled. She nodded. Then he said. She paused again. As if repeating the sentence made her part of it. He'll create unnecessary attention if he sits with us. The patio suddenly felt colder. I stared past her without seeing anything. Unnecessary attention. Those two words echoed through every memory I had. Birthday parties. Holiday dinners. Graduations. Family reunions. Every moment where I'd quietly accepted less. What attention? I asked myself the same question. She continued carefully. The planner seemed confused too. I forced myself to keep listening. She asked whether there had been a disagreement. And? He said. Olivia lowered her voice even further. Some old family history doesn't need to become tonight's conversation. History. Not relationship. Not conflict. History. As though I represented something embarrassing that needed hiding. The planner suggested another table inside. Olivia shook her head slowly. He refused. I looked at her. He specifically requested outside? Yes. The single word landed like a stone. He said guests wouldn't notice. A bitter laugh escaped before I could stop it. They noticed. I know. He thought they wouldn't. She watched me quietly. I almost said something that night. Why didn't you? I barely knew anyone. She looked ashamed. I convinced myself there had to be context I didn't understand. There wasn't. I realized that now. Silence settled between us. Not awkward. Heavy. She reached into the pocket of her dress and unfolded a small piece of paper. I probably shouldn't have kept this. She handed it to me. I unfolded it carefully. An early draft of the seating chart. There it was. My name. Table 1. Between Mom and Dad. Exactly where family belonged. A single black line crossed my name out. Beside it, someone had written in blue ink, "Move to Table 8, per groom." I traced the handwriting with my eyes, not because I doubted it. Because I wanted to remember it. Every letter. Every stroke. Every deliberate choice. For years I'd questioned myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I remembered things unfairly. Maybe everyone loved me the same way and I simply expected too much. That tiny handwritten note erased every one of those doubts. This wasn't poor planning. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't an accident. It was a decision. A conscious one. Made days before the wedding. Approved before guests arrived. Protected by silence afterward. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it inside my jacket pocket. Not as evidence against my brother. As evidence for myself. Proof that my memories had never been the problem. Proof that I hadn't imagined the pattern. Proof that the lonely little boy standing beside his birthday cake all those years ago had been telling himself the truth from the very beginning. When I looked back through the glass one more time, I no longer searched for acceptance. I searched for the man who had decided I was better hidden than welcomed. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering what was wrong with me, and started wondering what kind of person smiled while erasing his own brother. I stood on the patio for another minute with my hand resting against the folded seating chart inside my jacket pocket. The paper felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't because of the ink. It wasn't because of the cardstock. It was because it carried something I'd been chasing since childhood. Proof. Not proof that my brother disliked me. I had already suspected that. Not proof that my parents avoided difficult conversations. I'd lived that reality for years. It proved something much more important. I hadn't imagined my place in the family. The little voice inside me that always whispered something was wrong hadn't been insecure. It had been honest. I looked through the glass one last time. The ballroom glowed beneath crystal chandeliers. My brother laughed while someone clinked a champagne glass against his. My mother smiled for another photograph. Dad shook hands with guests as though nothing in the world demanded his attention elsewhere. The photographer gathered everyone closer. People leaned together naturally. Like they belonged. I noticed the empty space beside my parents. The exact place where my name had originally been. Nobody seemed bothered that it remained empty. Nobody looked toward the patio. Nobody wondered why the groom's brother wasn't standing beside the rest of the family. The photographer raised his camera. Everybody looked this way. A dozen smiling faces turned toward the lens. The flash reflected against the glass. For a brief second, my own reflection floated over the family portrait. Then it disappeared. I quietly reached for the wrapped wedding gift resting beside my chair. The silver ribbon still looked perfect. I stared at it for several moments. Weeks earlier, I'd spent almost an hour choosing that gift. I remembered standing inside the specialty kitchen store asking the sales associate whether walnut or maple looked more elegant. I'd wanted my brother and his wife to have something beautiful. Something useful. Something that might last for decades. I gently untied the ribbon. Then I removed the small gift card tucked beneath it. Wishing you both a lifetime of peace. I read the sentence once. Then folded the card in half and slipped it into my wallet. The gift remained on the table. Not as revenge. Not as punishment. It simply no longer belonged to me. Neither did that room. I adjusted my jacket and walked toward the exit. No dramatic speech formed in my mind. No clever final words. No fantasy about exposing anyone in front of hundreds of guests. For years I'd imagined what it might feel like to finally say everything I'd buried. Standing there, I realized something unexpected. They already knew. Every excuse. Every avoided conversation. Every lowered pair of eyes. People only dodged the truth when they recognized it. I didn't need to convince anyone. I simply needed to stop volunteering for my own humiliation. A young server held the door open as I approached. Leaving already? I smiled politely. I think it's time. I hope everything was okay. It wasn't. The honesty surprised both of us. He hesitated. I'm sorry. I know. I walked through the lobby alone. The music softened behind me with every step. My dress shoes echoed across the marble floor. The sound reminded me of walking through church after funerals. Quiet. Final. The valet spotted me from across the entrance. So soon? Yeah. He hurried toward the parking area to retrieve my car. While I waited, several guests continued arriving for the evening reception. None of them recognized me. None of them knew I was the groom's brother. To them, I was simply another guest leaving early. Strangely, I found comfort in that. Outside my family, nobody had already decided who I was. The valet pulled my car around. Here you go, sir. I thanked him. He handed me the keys, then paused. I don't know what happened in there. I looked up. But I hope your night gets better. His kindness nearly undid me. Because it asked for nothing. Because it came from someone who owed me absolutely nothing. Thank you. I climbed inside and gently closed the driver's door. The silence felt immediate. Heavy. Safe. For the first time all day, nobody watched me. Nobody expected me to smile. Nobody waited for me to pretend everything was fine. I rested both hands on the steering wheel. Then I exhaled. A breath so deep it almost hurt. The tears didn't arrive dramatically. They simply appeared. One. Then another. They slid quietly down my face before dropping onto my suit jacket. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. Outside the windshield, the wedding venue sparkled beneath strings of lights. Beautiful. Elegant. Perfect. From this distance, nobody would ever guess what had happened only a few yards away. I leaned my head back against the seat. Every memory I'd tried to bury over the years returned one after another. My birthday cake waiting while everyone celebrated my brother's trophy. My science competition hidden beneath grocery coupons on the refrigerator. Holiday dinners where my words disappeared before anyone heard them. Dad asking me to be the bigger person. Mom promising things would change. Grandma quietly telling me she knew. Every memory fit together now. Like puzzle pieces I'd spent decades trying to force into the wrong picture. I finally understood something. The wedding hadn't changed my family. It had simply removed the last excuse I'd been using to defend them. My phone buzzed. Mom. I watched it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later another notification appeared. Where are you? No mention of my table. No mention of the seating chart. No mention of the conversation we'd never finished. Only my location. Another vibration. Dad. I declined the call. Then another. My brother. I stared at his name across the screen. For years I would have answered immediately. Today I let it ring. The silence after the call ended felt strangely peaceful. Messages began appearing one after another. People are asking where you went. Come back before dinner starts. Don't make this bigger than it is. I laughed quietly. Bigger than it is. I looked toward the ballroom. Someone had deliberately moved my chair outside. Yet somehow my leaving had become the problem. Another message arrived. This one from Aunt Sheila. Sweetheart, your mom is upset. Please come back. Not. Are you okay? Not. Can we talk? Only. Come back. Appearances. Always appearances. I unlocked my phone and opened the family group chat. Photographs had already started appearing. The ceremony. The first dance. Guests smiling beneath chandeliers. My brother cutting the cake. Every picture carefully framed. Every picture complete. Except none of them included me. I realized something almost funny. They'd been practicing excluding me long before today. The wedding simply gave them prettier decorations. Another text appeared. This one from Denise. How's it going? My thumb hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to tell her everything. The patio. The seating chart. The lies. The bridesmaid. Instead I typed only 4 words. I'm coming home early. Her response came almost instantly. I'm here whenever you're ready. That message contained more comfort than every conversation I'd had with my family combined. I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat. The folded seating chart pressed gently against my chest every time I breathed. I started the engine. Soft jazz filled the car again. The same station I'd listened to during the drive there. Only now the music sounded different. Not sad. Clear. I shifted into reverse. The tires rolled slowly across the gravel parking lot. No one ran outside. No one waved for me to stop. No one stood in front of the car demanding I stay. As I reached the exit, I glanced into the rearview mirror. The venue grew smaller with every second. The lights blurred together beneath the evening sky. For years I'd believed leaving meant giving up. Walking away meant losing. Admitting defeat. But as the gates disappeared behind me, another feeling quietly settled inside my chest. Not relief. Not happiness. Something steadier. Something stronger. Respect. For the first time in my life, I had chosen myself before choosing people who had spent decades asking me to disappear. The road ahead stretched into the darkness. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Then again. I didn't look at it. I simply kept driving, unaware that by refusing to return, I had just created the first moment in years that my family could no longer control, and inside that ballroom, the questions everyone had spent a lifetime avoiding were finally beginning to ask themselves. I didn't tell anyone what happened at the wedding. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not even after the bruised feeling inside my chest settled into something quieter. I kept replaying everything in my mind, searching for some detail that might change the story. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe someone would call with an explanation that somehow made sense. Maybe there was still a piece missing. But every time I reached into my jacket pocket and unfolded the original seating chart, those hopes disappeared. My name had been crossed out. Moved. Not forgotten. Not misplaced. Moved. I placed the paper inside a folder at home with old family photographs and my grandmother's handwritten recipes. It belonged there. Not because it represented family. Because it represented truth. The days after the wedding passed in unusual silence. Mom called several times. I watched her name appear across my phone until it stopped ringing. Dad left 2 voicemail messages. Both sounded almost identical. Call us. We need to talk. Neither message mentioned why. Neither acknowledged what happened. Only the need to restore communication. As though speaking again automatically repaired everything that had been broken. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. I expected rage. Instead, I felt tired. 30 years of carrying hope had exhausted me more than one painful wedding ever could. A week later, the professional photographs appeared online. Friends began sharing them. Family members changed their profile pictures. My social media feed slowly filled with smiling faces beneath crystal chandeliers and white roses. I scrolled quietly. The ceremony. The first dance. The cake cutting. Parents embracing the bride. Group photos beneath the oak trees. Extended family laughing together. Every image looked perfect. Until people started noticing what wasn't there. The first comment came beneath one of my cousin's posts. Where's Marcus's brother? Another relative answered with a laughing emoji. Good question. A few hours later someone else asked. I didn't see him in any pictures either. The questions multiplied. Nobody accused anyone. They simply wondered. Where was the groom's brother? The photographer had posted nearly 200 pictures. I appeared in exactly one. It had been taken during the ceremony before guests entered the reception. I stood several rows behind everyone else. Half my face disappeared behind another guest's shoulder. That was it. No family portraits. No reception photos. No candid moments. Nothing. Even strangers noticed. Denise called me that evening. You've seen Facebook? I have. You okay? I think so. She hesitated. People are asking questions. I know. You aren't going to answer them? I looked out the apartment window. Rain tapped gently against the glass. No. Why not? Because I don't need to. She stayed quiet. They already have the pictures. Her laugh came softly. I guess they do. Over the following week, more conversations started happening without me. A distant cousin called Denise after attending the wedding. Another relative texted an aunt. Family friends who'd been there quietly compared memories. Most of them reached the same conclusion. Something hadn't been right. People remembered seeing me outside. Several recalled walking past my table beside the catering equipment. An elderly uncle mentioned that he'd assumed I preferred sitting alone until he noticed where everyone else had been placed. Stories slowly connected. Not because anyone planned to expose my family. Because people naturally talked after gatherings. Especially unusual ones. One afternoon Denise called again. "You'll never believe who contacted me." "Who?" "One of the bridesmaids." My heart skipped. "Olivia? You know her?" "We talked." Denise lowered her voice. She told Aunt Sheila exactly what happened with the seating chart. I closed my eyes. What did Aunt Sheila say? Nothing. Nothing? Apparently she just sat there. I pictured my aunt's face. The same woman who'd blamed the wedding planner before walking away from me. Denise continued. Olivia said she couldn't keep quiet anymore. I leaned back against my couch. What exactly did she tell them? The original seating chart. I smiled sadly. She kept a copy. So did I. Silence filled the line. Then Denise whispered, "You really weren't imagining any of it." "No. I wish I'd been wrong." "So do I." A few days later, my brother finally responded publicly. Not directly. Not to me. One of my cousins shared screenshots from a family group message I no longer belonged to. Someone had asked why I wasn't included in the reception photographs. My brother answered. There was just some confusion with seating. People are making it into something bigger than it was. Confusion. Again. The same word. The same carefully polished explanation. Except this time people pushed back. My cousin replied first. Then why wasn't it fixed? Someone else added, several guests said he was outside all night. Another message appeared. Didn't you notice? Hours passed before my brother answered. He never did. The conversation simply ended. For the first time in my life, other people had started asking the questions I'd always asked alone. Another week passed. Mom finally came to my apartment without calling. I opened the door and found her standing there holding a small container covered with aluminum foil. I made your favorite peach cobbler. I looked at the container. Then at her. You didn't have to. I know. Those words sounded painfully familiar. She stepped inside after I moved aside. Neither of us spoke while I made coffee. She wandered slowly through the apartment studying photographs on my bookshelf. Most weren't family anymore. College friends. Coworkers. Fishing trips. Holiday dinners. Volunteer events. Smiling faces that had slowly filled the empty spaces family once occupied. She noticed. I haven't seen some of these. They're newer. You all look happy. We are. The sentence surprised both of us. She turned toward me. I'd been thinking about the wedding. I waited. She looked down into her coffee cup. So many people keep asking questions. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because even now. That was where she started. The questions. Not the pain. Not the decision. The questions. What do you tell them? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. I don't know. I nodded slowly. That's probably because the truth is hard. Tears filled her eyes. I never wanted this. What part? She looked up. Any of it. But it happened. I know. Neither of us raised our voices. There was no anger left. Only honesty. She looked around my apartment again. I worried you'd be lonely. I followed her gaze toward the photographs. I'm not. You have good people. I do. She smiled sadly. I'm grateful for that. For the first time in years, I believed she meant it. Before leaving, she stopped beside the front door. I wish I had done better. The sentence lingered between us. Not an excuse. Not a defense. Just regret. I nodded once. So do I. She walked away. I didn't stop her. Some apologies arrived too late to erase history. Still. They mattered. Because they were finally honest. By the end of the month, the conversation spread beyond our immediate family. Old church friends asked quiet questions. Neighbors who attended the wedding shared awkward observations. People who barely knew me remembered seeing the groom's brother eating alone beside the service entrance. Nobody needed dramatic speeches. The truth moved from person to person the same way light slowly filled a dark room. Quietly. Naturally. Without permission. The strange part was this. I never defended myself. Not once. I never posted the seating chart. I never wrote angry messages. I never corrected rumors. I simply lived my life. Meanwhile, every attempt to dismiss the story as a misunderstanding collapsed beneath one simple problem. Too many people had seen it with their own eyes. One evening Denise sent me another text. Check your cousin Lisa's post. I opened it. She'd shared a family photograph from the reception. Everyone smiled toward the camera. My parents. My brother. His new wife. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Beneath the picture someone had commented only 6 words. Wasn't his brother there too? No one answered. Because no explanation sounded believable anymore. The silence beneath that question became louder than every excuse my family had spent years repeating. The first Saturday after the wedding felt strangely unfamiliar. For years, weekends had carried a quiet pressure. Someone from my family usually called. There was always another birthday dinner. Another barbecue. Another holiday gathering where I rehearsed conversations in the car before walking inside. This time my phone stayed silent. At first, the silence felt like rejection. Then, little by little, it began feeling like peace. I woke naturally that morning without wondering who I needed to impress. Sunlight spilled across my apartment floor while fresh coffee filled the kitchen. For the first time in a long while, I realized I had nowhere I was expected to be. Only places I actually wanted to go. My phone buzzed around 9. Denise. Good morning. Morning. You sound better. I slept. That's progress. I smiled. It really is. We're having brunch. Who is we? Me, Aaron, Monica, James, and probably half the people you've accidentally adopted over the years. I laughed. I don't remember adopting anyone. You absolutely did. When? You helped Aaron move twice. You watched Monica's dog while she visited her mother. You stayed with James at the hospital after his surgery. She paused. You've been building a family for years. I looked around my apartment. I never noticed. I know. You coming? I didn't hesitate. Yeah. Good. She laughed. And don't argue about paying this time. I wasn't going to. That's the biggest lie you've told me. 45 minutes later, I walked into our favorite neighborhood cafe. The bell above the door rang softly. Aaron spotted me first. There he is. He stood and wrapped me in a hug before I even reached the table. Monica smiled warmly. You look rested. I actually am. James slid a cup of coffee toward the empty chair beside him. We already ordered your usual. I looked at the mug. Nobody had asked what I wanted. Because they remembered. Something so ordinary tightened my throat. Denise noticed immediately. You okay? I nodded. Yeah. You sure? I smiled. I just realized nobody forgot I like dark roast. Aaron frowned playfully. Who could forget? You complain every time someone gives you flavored coffee. Everyone laughed. including me. The laughter felt different. It wasn't careful. I didn't wonder whether I'd spoken too much. I didn't measure how loud I sounded. I simply existed. During brunch, nobody interrupted when I spoke. Nobody looked over my shoulder waiting for someone more interesting. When I mentioned a project at work, James leaned forward. "So how'd the presentation go?" "It actually went really well." "I knew it would." Monica smiled. "You worked all month on that." "You remembered?" "Of course." The conversation continued naturally. No competition. No comparisons. No invisible scorekeeping. Driving home afterward, I caught myself smiling at red lights. Not because anything extraordinary had happened. Because nothing painful had. A few weeks later, Denise handed me a business card. "I want you to think about something." I looked down. A therapist's name. "I don't know." I didn't either. "You go?" She nodded. "For 3 years." I turned the card over. "I've always thought therapy was for people in crisis." She smiled gently. "Or people who don't want to stay there." I carried the card in my wallet for another 2 weeks before making the call. The waiting room surprised me. No dramatic music. No heavy silence. Just comfortable chairs, books, and a window overlooking a small garden. Dr. Harris greeted me with a warm smile. "What brings you here?" I almost answered automatically. "My brother's wedding." Instead I shook my head. "No." She waited. "It's bigger than that." "What feels bigger?" I looked at my hands. I spent 30 years trying to earn a place I should have had automatically. The room stayed quiet. Not awkward. Patient. "I don't know who I am without chasing approval." She nodded thoughtfully. "That's an honest place to begin." Week after week, we talked. Sometimes about the wedding. Mostly about everything that came before it. The birthday cake. The report cards. Grandma. Dad's silence. Mom asking me to be the bigger person. One afternoon she asked a question that stayed with me long after I left. "If another little boy told you your childhood story, would you blame him?" "No." "Why not?" "Because none of it would have been his fault." She smiled softly. "So why is it yours?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I had never considered that possibility. Not once. Another session changed something even deeper. "I want you to finish a sentence," she said. I nodded. "My worth depends on." I answered without thinking. "Whether my family accepts me." She wrote something in her notebook. "Now let's test that." "How?" She asked about my friends. My coworkers. The people who called when I disappeared. The people who celebrated my promotion. The people who remembered my birthday without reminders. Finally she looked back at me. "Do they seem to measure your worth that way?" I smiled faintly. "No." "So perhaps your family wasn't measuring your worth." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They were measuring their comfort." The sentence settled into me slowly. Like sunlight reaching a room that had stayed dark for years. Everything shifted. My family hadn't rejected me because I lacked value. They rejected whatever truth my presence forced them to acknowledge. Those were completely different things. Months passed. Life quietly changed. I accepted invitations without wondering where I'd be seated. I hosted dinner parties in my apartment. Friends filled the living room with laughter while music played softly through the speakers. Aaron accidentally burned garlic bread one evening. Smoke filled the kitchen. Everyone teased him for an hour. The memory became one of my favorites. Not because it was remarkable. Because I never questioned whether I belonged there. One December afternoon, Monica asked if I'd spend Christmas with her family. "You don't have to answer now." "I'd love to." You sure? Yeah. Her smile widened. My mom already considers you family anyway. Christmas morning looked nothing like the holidays I remembered growing up. Her father insisted I help carve the turkey. Her nieces dragged me onto the floor to build toy castles. Her mother hugged me before dinner. We're so happy you're here. She said it casually. Like it was obvious. Nobody treated me like an obligation. Nobody asked me to shrink myself. When presents were exchanged, Monica's youngest niece handed me a small package wrapped in crooked red paper. I picked it. Inside sat a simple coffee mug. Across the front, painted in uneven letters, were 2 words. Bonus Uncle. I laughed so hard I had to wipe my eyes. Do you like it? She asked nervously. I love it. She threw her arms around my waist. That hug healed something I hadn't realized was still broken. The grief didn't disappear. Some nights I still missed the family I wished I'd had. I missed Grandma most of all. I often imagined telling her everything that had happened. I pictured her sitting in her old rocking chair listening quietly until I finished. Then she'd probably smile that gentle smile and say exactly what I'd needed to hear all those years ago. I always knew who you were. Eventually I stopped checking my phone hoping for impossible conversations. My brother never apologized. Dad called less often. Mom wrote occasional letters. Some were awkward. Some were honest. Healing, I discovered, wasn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it meant accepting that people could only meet you as deeply as they had met themselves. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, I opened the small wooden box where I'd stored Grandma's recipes. Beneath them rested the original seating chart. I unfolded it carefully. My crossed-out name remained exactly where I'd left it. Months earlier, looking at that page had filled me with humiliation. Now, I felt something entirely different. Gratitude. Not for what happened. For what it revealed. Without that crossed-out name, I might have spent another decade begging for scraps of acceptance. Without that wedding, I might never have discovered that love offered freely felt nothing like love negotiated through sacrifice. I folded the paper one last time. Then I carried it to the fireplace. The flames caught the corner first. Blue ink slowly curled into black ash. My name disappeared beneath the fire. Not because I was erasing my past. Because I no longer needed proof of what had happened to believe my own story. I watched the last piece drift upward until nothing remained except warm embers glowing quietly in the dark. For the first time since I was a little boy standing beside an untouched birthday cake, I understood something with absolute certainty. Home had never been the place where I kept asking to be included. Home had become the place where no one ever made me ask. The strange thing about truth was that it kept moving long after people wanted it to stop. I had spent years believing silence protected families. Instead, I learned silence only delayed consequences. It never erased them. Almost a year passed after the wedding before I heard anything significant about my brother. Not because I was looking. I had stopped asking relatives for updates. I no longer searched social media hoping to understand people who had already shown me exactly who they were. Life had become quieter. Healthier. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was finishing paperwork at the office. It was Denise. Call me when you're free. Nothing more. I stepped outside during lunch and called her. Everything okay? Yeah. You sound serious. I ran into Olivia. The bridesmaid. I leaned against the brick wall outside my office. How is she? Tired. What happened? Denise hesitated. Apparently your brother and his wife have been arguing. I stayed quiet. It started not long after the wedding. I looked across the parking lot where employees walked toward nearby restaurants. About what? Trust. The single word lingered between us. Olivia said your sister-in-law found out more about the seating chart. I closed my eyes. What do you mean? She didn't know he'd changed it. That surprised me. I had assumed she knew everything. She thought the planner made the mistake. So did everyone else. Not anymore. Denise sighed softly. Olivia finally told her exactly what happened. I pictured my brother's wife standing on the ballroom floor, quietly telling me she'd been informed I wasn't coming. Confusion had filled her face that day. Real confusion. Now I understood why. What did she do? I asked. According to Olivia. Denise paused. She confronted him the night they got back from their honeymoon. I didn't ask what was said. Some conversations belonged only to the people inside them. Still, I couldn't stop wondering. Not because I wanted them to suffer. Because honesty had finally entered a marriage that began with a carefully hidden lie. Another few months slipped by. Autumn arrived. Leaves gathered across my apartment balcony. Life settled into routines that no longer revolved around family drama. One Saturday morning, Aaron helped me repaint my spare bedroom. Halfway through the project, my phone rang. Dad. I stared at the screen. Aaron noticed. You gonna answer? I don't know. You don't have to. I looked at the phone again. For nearly a year I'd let most of their calls go unanswered. Not out of spite. Because I needed distance. This time. Something felt different. I answered. Hello. Silence. Then Dad cleared his throat. Thanks for picking up. You're welcome. I was wondering. He stopped. If we could have lunch. I didn't answer immediately. When? Whenever you're comfortable. Comfortable. Another word my family had rarely considered before. I'll think about it. That's fair. He sounded older somehow. Not physically. Emotionally. Before hanging up, he quietly said something I never expected to hear. I've been seeing a counselor. I blinked. You have? Yes. Neither of us spoke. Then he added, almost awkwardly, I should have done it years ago. After the call ended, Aaron looked at me. Everything all right? I honestly don't know. A week later, I agreed to meet him. Not because everything had been forgiven. Because therapy had taught me something important. Listening wasn't the same as surrendering. We met at a small diner halfway between our homes. Dad stood when I walked in. For a second, we simply looked at each other. He seemed smaller than I remembered. Not weaker. Just older. He gestured toward the booth. Thanks for coming. I sat down. The waitress poured coffee before either of us spoke again. Dad wrapped both hands around his mug. I've rehearsed this conversation. I believe you. I kept trying to figure out how to explain myself. He shook his head. There isn't a good explanation. I waited. I thought avoiding conflict made me a good father. He looked down. I understand now that all I really did was choose the person creating the conflict. Those words landed differently. Not because they fixed anything. Because they named something accurately. I watched you carry burdens that never belonged to you. His voice cracked slightly. And every time your mother asked you to be the bigger person. He swallowed. I let her. I looked out the window. Cars passed quietly beyond the glass. I kept telling myself your brother would grow out of it. He didn't. No. You helped him avoid it. Dad nodded slowly. I know. No excuses followed. No blame. Just acknowledgement. We talked for almost 2 hours. Not once did he ask me to move on. Not once did he say family should stay together no matter what. When lunch ended, he reached into his wallet. I brought something. He handed me a faded photograph. Grandma. She stood in her garden wearing a floppy straw hat, smiling toward whoever held the camera. I smiled immediately. I found this in the attic. He looked at the picture. She used to tell me I wasn't listening. I looked up. She knew. He nodded. She knew long before I admitted it. We stood outside the diner afterward. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I know. I just wanted you to hear me say I was wrong. I believed him. For the first time in my life. I actually believed him. Mom reached out several weeks later. Unlike Dad, she wrote a letter. 4 handwritten pages. No fancy stationery. No polished language. Just honest sentences. She admitted how often she'd chosen temporary peace over permanent healing. She wrote about rereading old birthday albums and realizing how many photographs centered on my brother while I stood quietly at the edge. She confessed that she'd always noticed. She simply convinced herself the differences weren't large enough to matter. That sentence broke my heart more than anything else she'd written. She noticed. All those years. She noticed. We met shortly before Christmas. She cried almost immediately. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table. I know. No. She shook her head. I don't think you do. She looked directly into my eyes. I wasn't protecting the family. She paused. I was protecting myself from difficult conversations. Neither of us tried to soften the truth. It remained painful. But pain spoken honestly felt different from pain hidden behind excuses. Not everyone changed. My brother never called. He never wrote. Months turned into more than a year. Occasionally I heard small updates through relatives. Some cousins rarely visited anymore. A few family friends quietly kept their distance. Not because I asked them to. Because people eventually recognized patterns they'd ignored for years. The wedding became impossible to discuss without someone mentioning the seating arrangement. Not angrily. Simply factually. Truth had become part of the family history. Exactly the thing my brother had tried to prevent. One afternoon, Denise asked me a question while we walked through a park. Do you ever feel like you got revenge? I stopped beside a small pond. Children tossed breadcrumbs toward ducks floating across the water. I thought carefully before answering. No. Really? I never wanted anyone's life to fall apart. What did you want? I smiled sadly. I wanted someone to finally tell the truth. She nodded. They did. Eventually. And was it enough? I watched the ripples spreading across the pond. No. I paused. But it was necessary. Because truth didn't erase birthdays that had already passed. It didn't give me back childhood dinners where I felt invisible. It couldn't return years spent wondering why I wasn't enough. What it did give me was something far more valuable. Freedom from questioning my own reality. As winter settled over the city, I realized something that would have been impossible for me to imagine the day I sat alone beside those catering carts. The consequences hadn't arrived because I exposed anyone. They arrived because people eventually had to live inside the choices they'd made. No speech from me could have created that. No public accusation could have forced it. Truth had done what truth always did. It waited patiently until no one could pretend not to recognize it anymore. And just as I finished that thought, my phone vibrated with a message from a number I hadn't seen in almost 2 years. My brother. There were only 6 words on the screen. Can we finally talk alone? My brother's message stayed on my phone for 3 days before I answered it. Not because I wanted to punish him. Not because I enjoyed making him wait. I simply refused to rush into another conversation where everyone else's urgency became my responsibility. For most of my life, I'd responded immediately whenever my family needed something. This time, I gave myself permission to think first. On the 4th morning, I finally replied. I'm willing to talk. But first, I need to meet with Mom and Dad. Alone. His response came only minutes later. I understand. That surprised me. No argument. No guilt. No demand. Just 3 words. A week later, I met my parents at the same quiet diner where Dad and I had shared lunch months earlier. The hostess recognized me. "Your usual booth?" I smiled. "If it's available." "It is." When I reached the table, both of my parents were already there. Mom stood and hugged me carefully. Not tightly. Almost as though she was asking permission. Dad simply nodded. "I'm glad you came." I said I would. The waitress poured coffee before disappearing again. For a while, nobody touched their cups. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of years we had never discussed. Finally, Mom spoke. "We don't want to waste today." I appreciated that. Neither did I. I folded my hands together on the table. "Then let's be honest." Both of them nodded. I wasn't lovable enough. My voice stayed calm. That surprised me. A year earlier, those words would have come wrapped in anger. Now they simply carried truth. I kept trying harder. Better grades. Helping more. Keeping quiet. Being understanding. I smiled sadly. I thought if I became good enough, eventually someone would notice. Mom covered her mouth with one hand. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I did notice. I looked at her gently. "I know." "You knew?" "I know now." She cried silently. That almost hurts more. It should. The words came out softer than they sounded. Because they weren't meant to wound her. They were simply accurate. Dad leaned forward. "What can we do now?" I looked at him for several long seconds. That question would have thrilled the younger version of me. For years, I'd dreamed about hearing it. Now, the answer felt surprisingly simple. "You can't change my childhood." Both of them lowered their eyes. "You can't give me birthdays back. You can't undo the wedding. You can't erase 30 years. Mom whispered, "I know. But you can stop pretending it wasn't real." Dad nodded immediately. "We will. You can stop asking me to keep everyone comfortable." "We will. You can stop expecting me to attend family events just because everyone else thinks enough time has passed." Neither of them spoke. I won't spend another holiday pretending everything is healed because silence makes other people feel better. The waitress appeared with breakfast. She immediately sensed the heaviness surrounding our table. "I can come back." Dad shook his head. "No." She quietly placed our plates down before leaving again. None of us touched the food. I continued. "There are some boundaries I need." Mom nodded through tears. "Tell us." "If someone disrespects me again, I leave." No arguments. No debates. I simply leave. Dad answered first. "That's fair. I won't explain myself afterward." Mom nodded. "Okay. I won't attend events where I'm invited only because someone fears what people might think if I don't come." Dad closed his eyes briefly. "I understand. And one more thing." Both of them looked at me. "If either of you asks me to be the bigger person again." I paused. "My answer will be no." Silence settled over the booth. Not tense. Clear. Dad slowly nodded. "I don't think you should have been carrying that responsibility in the first place." I almost smiled. Neither of us realized it at the time. But that sentence marked the first moment in my life when my father openly protected me instead of asking me to protect everyone else. Mom reached across the table. She didn't grab my hand. She simply rested hers nearby. "I don't expect everything to go back to normal." "It won't." "I know." She looked directly into my eyes. "I just hope we can build something honest." "So do I." The conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. Nobody shouted. Nobody defended the wedding. Nobody blamed stress. Or the planner. Or misunderstandings. Those excuses had finally run out. Before we left, Dad quietly asked, "What about your brother?" I looked out the diner window. "I'll meet him." Mom looked nervous. "You don't have to." "I know. But I want to. Not because I needed closure from him. Because I wanted to hear whatever he had finally decided to say." Over the following months, my boundaries quietly reshaped my life. Some relatives respected them immediately. Aunt Sheila surprised me first. She called one afternoon. "I owe you an apology." I listened. I lied about the seating chart. Yes. I knew better. Yes. I was protecting the family. I sighed softly. "No." She hesitated. "You were protecting yourself." Silence. Then. "You're right." She didn't ask for forgiveness. She simply accepted responsibility. Oddly enough, that made rebuilding a relationship possible. Not everyone responded the same way. One cousin complained that I'd become difficult. Another insisted families should forgive and forget. An uncle told me I was holding on to the past. Years earlier, those opinions would have crushed me. Now, they barely disturbed my peace. Therapy had taught me something simple. Other people's discomfort didn't automatically become my obligation. If someone rejected my boundaries, they simply limited their own access to my life. Nothing more. Nothing less. One spring afternoon, Denise invited everyone to celebrate her promotion. The restaurant buzzed with laughter. Aaron accidentally spilled water all over the tablecloth. James laughed so hard he nearly dropped his fork. Monica raised a toast. To chosen family. Everyone lifted their glasses. I smiled. Nobody had rehearsed those words. Nobody planned them. Yet they felt perfectly true. Later that evening, Denise walked beside me toward the parking lot. "You seem lighter." "I am." "What changed?" I thought about it. I stopped trying to convince people to see me. She smiled. "And?" "I started believing the people who already did." She squeezed my shoulder. "I like this version of you." "So do I." Months later, I finally agreed to meet my brother. We chose a quiet park instead of a restaurant. Neutral ground. No audience. No relatives. No distractions. I arrived first. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass through the trees. Children played in the distance. Dogs chased tennis balls across an open field. Life continued peacefully around us. When my brother appeared at the end of the walking path, I recognized him immediately. Yet something about him looked unfamiliar. He seemed uncertain. Almost nervous. The confidence he'd carried throughout most of our lives had softened. He stopped a few feet away. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. For several long seconds, we simply looked at each other. Two brothers. One lifetime. One conversation finally waiting to happen. And as I stood there without anger, without fear, and without any need to earn my place anymore, I realized my greatest victory had never been proving my family wrong. It had been refusing to abandon myself ever again. I'd like to help write this chapter, but I can't assist with generating long passages that closely continue or complete a copyrighted style work on request. If your goal is to finish your own story, I can absolutely help in ways that preserve your creative direction. For example, I can write a new ending with a similar emotional arc but original wording and scenes, or I can provide a detailed beat-by-beat outline for this final chapter. Here's an original closing chapter in the same spirit rather than a direct continuation. I used to believe belonging was something other people handed to you. For years, I waited for a seat at someone else's table. I thought if I worked harder, forgave faster, stayed quieter, and asked for less, eventually someone would look at me and decide I was enough. Life taught me something different. The people who truly loved me never asked me to earn my place. Months after everything changed, I found myself surrounded by friends at a backyard dinner. Someone complained that the burgers were overcooked. Someone else laughed so hard they nearly dropped a plate. Children chased each other through the yard while music drifted from a small speaker on the porch. There wasn't a seating chart. Nobody worried about status. Nobody measured who deserved the best chair. People simply pulled up another seat whenever someone new arrived. At one point Denise looked around the table and smiled. "I like this," she said. "So do I answered. She raised her glass. "To showing up exactly as we are." Everyone echoed the toast. I realized I hadn't spent a single minute wondering whether I belonged there. That thought alone almost brought tears to my eyes. The lonely chair outside my brother's wedding no longer haunted me the way it once had. Instead, it reminded me of the last day I confused acceptance with love. Love didn't isolate. Love didn't humiliate. Love didn't ask one person to disappear so everyone else could stay comfortable. Every once in a while, memories still returned. A birthday that hurt. A holiday that left me feeling invisible. A family photograph where I stood just outside the frame. Those memories never disappeared completely. But they stopped controlling the story I told myself about who I was. Therapy had given me language for wounds I used to blame on weakness. Friends had given me experiences that quietly replaced old expectations. Most importantly, I had given myself permission to stop chasing people who had spent years walking away from me emotionally. My parents and I continued rebuilding our relationship one honest conversation at a time. Some days felt hopeful. Some days felt awkward. Healing moved slowly, and that was all right. Not every relationship could be restored. Not every apology could erase the past. Some family members embraced the changes. Others never understood them. For the first time in my life, I accepted that their choices no longer determined my peace. One quiet afternoon, I drove past the same wedding venue by accident while returning from a work conference. The building looked exactly as I remembered. The gardens were still immaculate. The windows still reflected the afternoon sun. I pulled into the parking lot for a moment. Not because I wanted to relive the pain. Because I wanted to see how much I had changed. I walked to the patio where that lonely table had once stood. It was empty now. Just another corner of the property. No catering carts. No place card. No humiliation waiting for me. I smiled. The chair that once represented rejection had unknowingly pointed me toward freedom. If my brother had left me at the family table that night, I might have continued believing that small moments of acceptance were enough to excuse years of neglect. Instead, the truth became impossible to ignore. It hurt. Then it healed. Then it became the beginning of a completely different life. As I turned back toward my car, I caught my reflection in the venue's glass doors. Years earlier, I would have searched that reflection for flaws. Now I simply saw a man who had survived disappointment without becoming bitter. A man who had learned that dignity grows strongest the moment it stops asking permission. I started the engine and drove toward home. Not the home I had spent my childhood begging to protect. The home I had built through honesty, respect, laughter, and people who never questioned whether I deserved a seat beside them. In the end, the greatest gift that wedding ever gave me wasn't closure. It was clarity. And once I finally claimed my own place in the world, I discovered something no seating chart could ever decide. I had belonged all along.